policy and politics with me, Tarun Nangia. As the aviation sector comes out of the shock that it suffered during the times of the corona pandemic, the government has also begun efforts to handhold the industry and nurse it back to health. In its own way, the Ministry of Aviation, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, which is headed by Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, has got a dual responsibility. The first also is to the consumers who travel. India is largely a low middle class country, so there is an element of responsibility there. Secondly, it is to the airlines, because the industry will exist only if the airlines individually are profitable. So that also is a very strong element of responsibility. Keeping this in mind, the aviation ministry came out with a direction where they fixed minimum and maximum price caps that could be charged to by the airline companies. For example, in India, most of the flights, as you would see, are up to 120 minutes. So for a flight between 90 to 120 minutes, which is 2 hours, the maximum fare that can be charged is rupees 10,000, while the minimum fare that can be charged is 3,500. So the beauty of this is minimum price ensures that there is no undercutting, while maximum fare price ensures there is no profiteering. Profiteering is also a term that we must be wary with, because it's a consumer-facing industry. But is this enough for the airlines? Because as we see, the ground handling companies, which for my viewers' knowledge is all the services that you get when you disembark the plane, you know, the staircases which come, the trolleys and all, a lot of other things. So even those companies are in losses. What needs to be done by the aviation ministry to handle the industry to health while ensuring the consumers are also taken care of? And to discuss this, I have an eminent panel today. I have with me aviation industry veteran Parvez Damania. He is now been for over, as I know, well over 40 years, closely associated with the industry. Every big airline you come to know, there is a shadow of Parvez Damania lurking in somewhere, to lightly put it. So he is one of those, and I thank him for sparing his time today for this show. I have with me senior advocate Parag Tripathi. Anybody who follows the aviation sector closely will see him either representing GMR in some matter, some airline company in some matter, a ground handling company in the other matter. Wherever in aviation, Parag Tripathi's name is read and the industry knows it. And of course, now the viewers largely know it. I have with me Mr. Ryan Karanjawala. He's managing partner, Karanjawala and Company. They have acted for Air India and Indian Airlines, which is, of course, India's leading carriers. So in a sense, even 20 years ago, he was involved with the aviation sector when there were two different companies. So he and his firm has got exposure to the aviation sector. He will bring in his expertise and also legal issues he will raise. I thank Mr. Parag Tripathi and Mr. Karanjawala for their time, for joining me on this show. Let us begin with the expert, Mr. Parvez Damania, and you give me an opening comment on this show.
Tarun, thank you very much for inviting me to your show. I would say industry connected since 30 years, 40 years, puts me in a different age bracket. But I think the aviation industry, which was doing exceedingly well before the COVID, has suffered very, very badly. As you're aware, India was one of the fastest growing industries 5 years in a row. We were growing at the rate of 17, 18%. No country in the world has shown this kind of growth. China was at about 11, 12%, and we were almost number 3 in the world. And I think that time is not far. It'll come back and we'll get into the same bracket. But the COVID has hit the industry very, very badly. And again, aviation industry is just not airlines. There are a lot of allied industries that are connected to the aviation industry. For example, the ground handling and a lot of other industries. These industries were also hit very, very badly. And unfortunately, when the government brought out that 20 lakh crore package, nothing really came out of for the aviation industry. Still, I think the aviation industry has moved up pretty fast, caught on well, growth is going on substantially well, and I think we should get back to the old figures very soon. I was expecting that the government would come up with something substantial, but nothing has come. There are a lot of areas where the government can come forward hold the hand of the aviation industry. See, aviation industry is to be treated as a priority sector. It's not a luxury anymore. Today, aviation industry is a very, very important in the growth story of India. So I think the government could do a lot of things, which we'll discuss in the show later. But this is what my views are at this stage.
Okay, okay. I'll quickly get Mr. Karanjawala on this. Where do you think the government stand puts us, and where are we headed?
See, first, let me just elaborate what Parvez pointed out. In India, in 2013, 2014, there were 169 million footfalls. In 2018-19, prior to COVID, there were 344 million footfalls. So Parvez is absolutely right when he said India, as far as aviation industry is concerned, is one of the fastest growing and most rapid growing. Of course, all this took a setback in the COVID. And for 2 months, as you know, from 24th March to the 20th May, all flights were suspended because of COVID. After that, government allowed the approved scheduled airlines to open at 1/3 of their strength, 33%. Today, of course, it's gone up to 80. And then what the government did, and I think with some good sense, was somewhere in the month of August, I think around 24th August, they sort of started regulating the band within which prices could be charged. So there was a sort of envelope, so to speak. And you see, they sector into 7 separate categories. So the first category was flights which were less than 40 minutes. Then it went on to up to 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 120 minutes, and so on. And then in these bands, they said you can charge a minimum price and you can charge a maximum price. And that's absolutely correct and essential because as it is, the airline industry is an industry which is always turbulent, is largely loss-making. In fact, the rumor is, or the story goes, that if you aggregate balance sheets of all the airlines since the Wright brothers began flying, they would be in the negative. So the government has to be very sensitive to this, and they have to ensure that at the one hand, you don't have predatory pricing, and the other hand, you don't have extortionist pricing. And that is why, keeping in mind the delicate situation we were going through, they brought out a band, which they have constantly been updating and changing. The band said that you could charge between, this is the minimum, this is the maximum, but also only 40% of your charge should be at the mid-level and so on. So the government has taken a very proactive view towards how to regulate the industry in these difficult times. And many more steps have to be done, which of course Parvez and Parag will speak to us about.
Mr. Tripathi, you have a exposure to the sector from the industry standpoint as well as the airport authority standpoint in your long career where you have represented these companies. Can you give us a 360-degree view of what's happening and what should happen?
Yeah, actually, not only for the companies, but for the Airport Authority of India itself. Yeah. Now, you see, as Ryan rightly pointed out, and Parvez also rightly pointed out, these are troubled times. These are COVID times. And this is classically a situation where the government has to be given what we call in law the free play at the joints. I must begin with a mea culpa. You can never take a law out of a lawyer. So therefore, I will have, my lens would be to that extent clouded from my experience as a lawyer. But you have to give that play in the joints to the government. There was a PIL which was filed against these fare bans which were put in, because India is, of course, a very litigious country. So anything you do, there's always echo in the court. And that PIL was dismissed with a very nice observation by the Delhi High Court in the last para, where it pointed out that you have to look at experimental solutions. There cannot be a mathematical solution to a problem like this, and you have to give a free movement in the joint. Now, that is what you have to do. Now, nobody says that the fare bans, the way they are structured, are the best possible bans. They don't have to be, but they represent a sensitivity and awareness on the part of the government, as Parvez rightly emphasized, and as Ryan also pointed out, that you have to save this industry, because this is very important to the economic well-being and the forward thrust for the whole nation. Having said that, there's a little niggling problem I have with these fare bands, as I was discussing before we went on the air. There is a section 5 of the 1934 Act which points out that the central government can amend the rules. And I take it that these fare bands have been made pursuant to that power. But there's a requirement that those amended rules have to be laid on the floor of the parliament, which means both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, which apparently has not been done. Fortunately, this aspect was not brought to the notice of the court, and therefore, so far it has not been adjudicated. But I think the government should, if it has not happened, they should go ahead and do it so that there's no technical issue involved. But taking a broader picture and not merely a legalistic picture that is putting it on the floor of the house or not putting it there, I think what is required, and that's what the minister, the honorable civil aviation minister also said in the house. He said that, look, today they are running, as Ryan said, at 80% capacity. And all these fare bands will no longer be necessary once it reaches 100% capacity. So this is just a stopgap arrangement, which brings me to the bigger issue which Parvez raises as to what are the various steps government can take to specifically and proactively help the sector. Now there, I think Parvez, notwithstanding his mild objection to being called as having a 40-year experience, which he has in this sector, he will be the best person to deal with it, because these are aspects really of how and where the government can come and help out on the edges for this industry to come back to its normal, prosperous, vibrant self, which is very important today.
Parag, what I believe...
Parvez, 1 minute.
Yes.
Before you begin, because you don't only have experience of this sector, you're personally run an airline.
Correct.
And you've seen the pits and the falls, and you've seen the peaks and the valleys.
Correct. Absolutely.
Give us also, just give us a little bit of a perspective. When you were running the airline, what were the principal problems that you faced? Do the airline operators still face those problems today? And what are your suggestions?
Ryan, first and foremost, I'll tell you something regarding the pricing. I think the airline should be left themselves to regulate the prices. I think the government should not interfere. This is a free market economy. At the same time, I think the airline should self-regulate themselves. They should see, the worst thing is you sell so low that ultimately you get ruined yourself. So the airline should realize, not sell it so low that it affects them very badly in the long run, but at the same time not take advantage of a situation where they can keep raising the price. I think we need to self-regulate. I think we should not, the government steps in when the government feels, like somebody was mentioning that Manish Tripathi flew and he paid something 40,000 rupees for a ticket. Now, that is wrong, no. If the airlines just saw that, so if the airlines would self-regulate, then the government would not have to interfere.
Parvez, I have a point. No, but you can complete first.
Yeah, I'll tell you something. When my experience was when we were running, this was so regulated, the industry, the government had a say in everything. Even today, let us look at this very interesting thing. Today, an airline operator, what is in his hands? Nothing, except the price of the sandwich. He can't decide anything. The fuel is decided by the government. Insignificant what the international prices are. The landing parking is decided by the government. The navigational prices are decided by the government. The dollar keeps going up, so my lease rents are getting affected. My engineering spares are going up. So it's very little is left in the hands of the operator. Now, what the government can do, there was a lot of talk, and even in the new civil aviation policy, there was a lot of talk that the government is going to support MROs. I think the government needs to support more and more MROs in India. I think even today, Tarun, as we discussed during the day, all aircrafts in India go abroad for maintenance, for heavy-duty maintenance. Almost all airlines send them abroad. If the government made it more viable, more tax-free, more easier for people to put up MROs in India, then airlines would give their aircrafts in India. The aircrafts would be maintained. Right now, we lose a tremendous amount of foreign exchange by aircrafts being maintained abroad. A lot of time, suppose I have to send the aircraft to Singapore. Imagine the amount of time it takes the aircraft to go to Singapore, comes back and was maintained at Bangalore or Delhi. It would save so much time and money. Another thing, better training environment in India, more simulators, better flying schools. Today, why do people go abroad to study? Because quality training is not available in India. If quality flying schools were available in India, people could complete the training in time. People would not send people abroad. You see, I'm not saying this government has not done enough. This government has done tremendous work in the aviation sector. This kind of growth would not have happened if the aviation sector wasn't supported by the government. But I think the government needs to look at this as a priority sector, support in every way possible. Easier loans, treat it as a priority sector, still let it regulate, reduction of taxes, support on fuel, and not only look at aviation sector as just the airline, but support all the allied sectors around the aviation sector. So I think these are some of the things that government can do. I think even the government stress on opening of the sector, Udan sector, opening so many airports, reviving the airports is very good. I think so. Overall, we are happy, but the government should still support the sector more, I feel. And I think Indian airlines are doing exceptionally well. The quality of standards maintained by Indigo, Spice, Vistara are exceptional, as good as international, if not better, I think.
So I'll go to Mr. Karanjawala at this point.
But before that, Parvez, a quick question to you, Parvez. What would be the cost, you think, of setting up an MRO or an aviation school? What is the ballpark cost?
Okay, I'll give a very, very rough idea. MRO would depend upon what level of service do you want to go to. See, engine MROs are very expensive, but I think a basic MRO to do heavy-duty maintenance checks on an aircraft like 320 or a 737 would be in the range of about $20 to $30 million. Now, again, if you're talking of a flying school, are you just talking of the CPL part? CPL part would not be very expensive. It's a 15 to 20 crores. But if you're talking of simulator facility, then it's much more. There is a gentleman called Sanjay Mandave, Captain Sanjay Mandave, who's opened this place called FSTC. He's one of the only private sectors who set up FSTC with about 9 simulators. They're doing exceptionally well. So I think more simulator facilities, so we don't waste foreign currency, we don't send people abroad, more better flying training schools in India, so students go abroad. And this will help the sector at the same time save a lot of foreign exchange. So, but I think there are a lot of people looking at MROs. I know for a fact that the Bird Group is looking at seriously the MRO sector, to put up an MRO sector in Mial and Nagpur. I think those kind of people should come forward, and I'm sure people will come forward. The aviation industry keeps going. And MRO is a big requirement. MRO, flying school simulators are big requirements as part of the aviation industry.
Okay, I'll share a short anecdote before I go to Mr. Parag Tripathi on this issue. Ajay Singh, who's the promoter of SpiceJet, told me interestingly in an earlier interview that all his planes go to Dubai for servicing. He would happily have them serviced in Gurgaon or wherever there is an MRO, which actually means a facility to service aircraft for people who are not acquainted with this sector, our viewers. But that's not happened. Mr. Tripathi, in your experience with the Airports Authority and other agencies also dealing with airport operators, why do you think MROs have not come up in India? Because this sector in a sense has been vibrant in India pre-independence also. Tata Airlines, everybody knows. So why do you think as something as basic as servicing hasn't come up?
You see, I guess in any sector, you have to have that entrepreneurial spirit to take that risk which goes with it. And you will wait with other options which are open to you, which probably will have a lesser risk. So I think it's a risk-profit trade-off which you have to look at. And once, as Parvez says that, for instance, some people are setting up their units. So once these units are set up, and he says now the Bird Group and MIL are also thinking of setting up an MRO. So once these are set up and these are made available, it is bound to make a lot of difference. And I believe our finance minister has also said and made a statement that the government itself will take steps to make India an MRO hub.
Correct.
Because it's ultimately just setting about it. And there, I think, is one more area where the government can very constructively help and direct. After all, take the case of our software giants. Take the case of our pharma companies. Once you create a hub, once you create that expertise, because this is not preening on my part as an Indian, but Indians are very good at acquiring new skills. So if you sort of give that direction, I see no reason why we can't be the MRO hub of the world. But yes,
Okay.
it requires the spirit, it requires governmental help, and it requires the desire to take that risk.
Okay. I'll go
Parag, I'll tell you something. I know.
Yeah, please, Mr.
Tarun, I
Damania, then
know
I'll
for
go
a
to Mr.
fact.
Karaja.
Yeah, Tarun, I know for a fact that for substantial amount of time, I was in discussion with Dr. Kiran Rao of Airbus, and Airbus is also committed and is very interested in coming to India to set up a giant MRO. So they are all looking for good to take in business houses and people, again, like people who are already in the aviation industry, like, for example, Bird Group has a general aviation MRO, which they're maintaining a huge fleet of private jets. Now, kind of experience, they could and they will definitely come into larger aircraft. Smaller aircrafts MROs exist. It's the larger aircraft MRO that don't exist. But I'll tell you something. Boeing has set up an MRO in Nagpur along with Air India and is doing exceptionally well. As a matter of fact, interestingly, Jet, being a private player, was sending their 777s to the Boeing Air India MRO to get maintained. They found it to send it to Nagpur to an Air India MRO more viable than sending the planes abroad. And as a matter of fact, if you remember, when Jet Air was running, they had set up their own MRO in Bombay. So I think all these things are happening, and I'm sure progress will occur and government support will come forward.
Okay, okay. Mr. Karanjawala, as far as Air India goes, we are seeing government's efforts for the past 2 years and now even this year to privatize it. Now, private airlines have been blaming Air India that because Air India accumulates losses, and that is why these airlines shut down, because they cannot afford losses at the rate which Air India can, because of course it's subsidized by the government. Do you think it's a step in the right direction for the aviation sector?
See, the aviation sector, fortunately, is one of the sectors which for several long years has had very good aviation ministers. We had Praful Patel. Now we've got a dynamic person like Praful Patel. We now have a dynamic person like Hardeep Puri. I think in the long run, there was no option but to sell Air India and privatize Air India, because that's the only way you can go. You can't keep on having a situation where you're making losses, and at the same time, you can't have a situation where, the whole industry has to be dependent on just one carrier. Frankly, what needs to be done is an atmosphere has to be created where there are 10, 12, 15 national carriers, 10, 12, 15 scheduled carriers, which are all functioning in a very viable way. Now, that is where I slightly disagree with Parvez. I feel that at times it might be necessary for government pin and put a price check. For example, you see, what sometimes happens is when people do predatory pricing, it's in order to cut out the competition and eliminate one person from the game so that then you can alone survive. And while self-regulation is a good thing, I'm not always sure that self-regulation will prevail, because everyone is not on the same page and everyone feels that in order to survive and in order to prosper, there should be fewer competition rather than more competition. There, I feel that the government must step in delicately, of course, at the right time, in the right way, delicately, in order to keep the envelope going. So while if somebody is charging extortionate prices, you immediately bring them down. On the other hand, if there is a consistent aspect of predatory pricing so that some airlines are slowly getting eliminated because of the losses that they are accumulating, then you have to factor all the factors in and take a decision as to whether you want to bring the minimum price higher.
Okay.
So, as far as your original question to Air India, certainly I think Air India being privatized is a very good step.
It's a good step. I will, before going to Mr. Damania, a very quick question from Mr. Tripathi. Now, when Kingfisher went down, the promoters and so many people associated with Kingfisher began to say that Kingfisher went down because government kept on subsidizing Air India and private airlines are not that cash rich to afford those kind of losses. Was it a fit case for the Competition Commission that one airline is allowed to accumulate losses of 60,000 crore subsidized by the government? Another airline doesn't have any sources. So do you think in that way, the privatization of Air India solves the industry's problems altogether? That of unequal competition?
Yeah, you see, we all know that no one action can solve all problems together. Given that caveat, I think today I would agree with Ryan here that to privatize, whether to privatize Air India or not is really a no-brainer. It's not rocket science. You have no option. It is like TINA. There is no other alternative. However, there will be an issue of the various unions, etc. in Air India, and that will have to be handled with some advanced planning, because that, as we have now seen, has become a problem in India. Whatever may be your intention, you have to smoothly implement it, and that's a requirement which is of a different dimension. But in principle, yes, you have to privatize Air India. The going down of Kingfisher is a very complex area. Maybe we would need a whole session on that, because it's not so simple. And it's perhaps not all, it would be wrong to call it only culpability of those who are running Kingfisher. But there were so many circumstances, including the high prices of turbine, air, fuel, etc. There are 1,001 issues which were there. But yes, you are right that the private sector airlines don't have that benefit of leaning back on government protection to the extent Air India does. And that is also an aspect which I'm sure this government will look into, and a government should look into. Because
Mr. Damania, can you comment on the same?
Tarun, first and foremost,
Tarun, before,
like everybody
Tarun,
sorry. Tarun, like everybody
no,
said.
I was saying before Parvez comes in, I just wanted to say one thing, one observation. I feel that in the running of airlines, there are two kinds of models, you know. There is what I would personally, from the two people I know, one I would call the Vijay Mallya model, the other I would call the Rahul Bhatia model. I remember when Vijay first started his airline, he came to me and he said, Ryan, start flying Kingfisher. He's an old friend of mine. So I said, of course. And I had started. I said, look, Vijay, I will fly Kingfisher because we are friends, and I, in any case, love comfort. Whether it's a hotel or it's an airline, I'm happy to fly Kingfisher. I like business class. I will certainly fly. But I said, don't you feel that the pricing that you're doing, I think, Parvez, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at that time also, Delhi-Bombay sector was right in the beginning, 30,000 or something. Is that correct, Parvez?
No,
Around that much.
no,
That
I
was
think,
his pricing
see, I'll tell you something. First and foremost, whether Air India should be privatized. Tarun, am I there?
Yes, you are there.
Tarun, first and foremost, whether Air
Yeah.
India should be privatized or not is a no-brainer. Air India has to be privatized. And I think if somebody can do it,
Correct.
this government can do it. That's what I'm very, very clear. And I think
Correct.
and I think that great interest. And one reason where Tatas will succeed, apart from the financial structuring, I can't tell you, I'm not an expert at it. But as far as the labor policy goes, the Tatas will be able to handle the unions and the laborers very well. The people will be more than happy to go with the Tatas because their policies are very, very good as far as manpower is concerned. So I think this will happen. Now, second question is what happened to Kingfisher? Again, you can't blame it on one sector. There are large number of sectors, but according to me, bad management issues was a high priority, you know. And like Ryan said, we could take an entire show on what happened to Kingfisher, write books on it, and still the story will be incomplete. But there were a lot of factors, and Air India and government policies towards Air India was definitely not a factor that affected Kingfisher. A lot of a lot of multiple sectors where we could do a separate show together. But I don't
know because I'm totally out of time. Mr.
Tarun,
Ran had to complete his anecdote in 30 seconds. He can complete.
Yeah. So Tarun, there are two things. One is, as I told you, the Vijay man. So Vijay told me if people are willing to pay 60,000 per square foot for a flat in Bombay, why will they not pay these business class prices? And why will they not pay for a good air service? On the other hand, you look at Rahul Bhatia. He's a completely cost-driven, pared to the bone, super efficient way of working. For example, I have a common friend called Manik Dabar, who used to bring out this magazine for Jet Airways, you know, and he wanted to put it on Indigo. And what happens with these airline magazines is that the magazine pays the airline for carrying it. You know, they give you a certain amount, several crores, yeah, if you carry there, this thing. But Rahul absolutely refused. I remember I had put them two together. Rahul absolutely refused because he said it adds to the weight of the airline.
Correct,
I will
correct.
just not do anything that makes it more inefficient. There were these two different contrasts which I wanted to give you to show how people are in their approach to the industry.
Okay, so a frugal bare bones model with a model where you have a lot of models and luxury thrown in. So, in fact,
Mali had different kind of models thrown in.
I will end this show with an anecdote of what Rajiv Bajaj famously said. He said that why Indigo succeeded in a very bad environment was because of its business model, and why Kingfisher failed because it did not have a business model but only models. And I think he put it in a lighter way. But I would like to thank Parag Tripathi, Parvez Davania. You had a last laugh. And Mr. Ryan Karanjawala, thank you so much. And I hope viewers enjoyed this show too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.